an Unspoiled Network podcast.
This is Spoil Me, covering the Vorkosigan Saga, Book 2-ish, chapters 19 through the epilogue. This is the final episode of coverage for Book 2. In these chapters, Cordelia makes quite an entrance with the head of the rival who had tried to start a coup in a sack. Also, her son Miles makes it, but there are difficulties. I respect that. Welcome to Spoil Me. Welcome to the show, everyone. I am Natasha. Thank you very much to Jeff for commissioning this episode. I really want to start off by saying that I feel like I was so caught up last episode with the minutia of how things went in that chapter that I really didn't take the time to sit back and adequately be impressed with the fact that Cordelia essentially ended a war. And thankfully, since I wasn't taking that time, these chapters give me a moment to really sit and process that. You guys, this bitch is crazy. I love this for her. She just went out there against the wishes of her husband, who is essentially king, to do what the fuck she had to do. And in the, midst of her just finding her own child, she manages to take the head off the man who is trying to... I mean, that is... that's more than competence porn. That feels somehow excessive. I don't even know what to call it. So I feel like I was just so... I think overwhelmed by everything that happened in the last episode, and there's a lot of horror, there really is, that Padma being killed and the childbirth and everything, the death of the princess. I think that I was just really so distracted in some ways by all of that the full impact of what it was they had managed to accomplish just hadn't quite hit for me. And it wasn't until I started reading these chapters that I finally sat back a moment and went, oh my God, she's got his head in a bag. That man was supposed to be in charge, and his head's in a bag. It just, oh man. So just wanted to give her flowers on that she should have gotten in the last episode. Also, and I'm going to obviously be going in and reading sections and going beat by beat eventually, but I do want to take a moment to really applaud this author for the fact that her son Miles isn't fine. This may sound sort of weird, but I think you'll probably know what I mean. So many stories where there is a birth that is potentially going to be complicated. There will be close calls, and then everybody ends up okay. And I've covered enough stuff that included pregnancies that I have seen it time and time again where there is a threat that is shared, but as a reader, I will fully admit I didn't really take the risks to Miles's health seriously, because often it's just miraculously okay. And I don't even really mind that most of the time. But it's impossible to ignore that in a society such as ours, which we may not be as visibly bigoted against the disabled as the Barrayarans are, we still are secretly, you know? It tends to be something that I think a lot of authors sort of avoid, is dealing with a character who has a disability. Now, I will admit that despite having a disability, this kid, by the time we actually see him in the epilogue, is like running and walking and is okay. But it's not like he's totally fine. There's still stuff going on with him. And evidently, I don't know if him breaking his arm is simply what would have happened to any boy who got thrown from this horse, or if it's supposed to be that his bones are still a little bit more like brittle and delicate than the bones of another boy his age who hadn't had this issue would have. But I will cop to the fact that I won't say that she undoes it, but she doesn't actually make us as readers sit with this for too long before kind of like solving the problem a little bit. However, I still really respect that she is not shying away from the realities of the side effects of what this drug could do, and that the concerns everybody has had are very real. And because like there are times where it sort of can be played as if everybody around you was just a mother hen who was too worried, and they were, they actually don't know as much as the main character, who was sure it would all be fine, and they all turn out to be like surprisingly wrong about the situation. And that can get kind of like a little Deus Ex Machina plot armory feeling, where everybody, as long as they're involved with the main character, that like the difficulties that another character might have had, our main isn't going to be dealing with. So and like I said, a lot of storytellers, whether it be on television or movies or in books, when characters suffer a setback with their disability, it can be really, really short-lived in a way that ultimately makes it feel like maybe it doesn't matter that this happened to them, that it's not holding them back at all. And I'm going to put Hunger Games on blast for this just a little bit, because Katniss goes deaf in one ear, and we have Peeta losing his leg at the end of the first book. But Peeta gets like a replacement leg that mostly functions as well as his old leg. Like, he is slower, but it's not the kind of like adjustment that it would be for somebody in our universe. And Katniss, when she's done with the games, her hearing is back entirely. They were able to heal that completely. And sometimes I just wish that it was left, that what a character had to deal with was allowed more time. I don't even mind if we decide like we're going to have them heal eventually, but it feels sometimes like the horror of what it would be like to go from fully able-bodied to then losing your, whether it's just like range of motion or like full capability of doing certain things for yourself. That is a really difficult topic, and I don't feel like if you take that away from a character but then give us no time where we actually are experiencing that with them, I don't feel like that really counts. And I sort of am like interested in seeing what this author winds up doing with Miles. And I hope that everything he has gone through, because clearly there's been like a bunch of surgeries, right? I hope that the full impact of that and what it would be like to parent a child who's going through that, what it would be like to be a child who has always grown up with the threat of another surgery, another like complication over their head. I hope that is explored a little bit. Because Because I just think it could have been very easy to, not only for the sake of the simplicity of having the child be healthy, but also for the satisfaction of sort of telling Piotr to fuck off. It would have been very tempting to make this not be a problem and throw it in Piotr's face. And, you know, and clearly, based on how 5 years has had to pass before he is able to, like, be a fucking human being to this child, evidently, that shit took some time. But I don't really begrudge the author jumping ahead in time, because it feels like there's just been a lot that I can assume happened along the way. So anyway, that was just like my take on this, because it's something that I have really noticed. I've just become, after, you know, becoming more friendly with people who have disabilities, after Owen has been dealing with, like, what we believe is an autoimmune disorder. My mother has an autoimmune disorder. I've just grown to be a little bit more sensitive to how these things impact everybody, and how all of us are only temporarily able-bodied. And we don't really like to look at that. All of us sort of behave as if we're able-bodied and that it's here to stay. As long as you were born healthy, that's just how you're going to be able to, like, live your life. And even if you are lucky enough to avoid any sort of, like, accident or injury, you still are going to age. And there are things that can happen due to age that you can't control. We just really want to behave like we have control over things. That's really what it comes down to. And we don't. We don't. You know, we can do our best and we can be careful about certain things, and then the rest is sort of up to fate. And so it just made me hyper aware in all kinds of different spaces, the attitude that we have, whether it's about lack of accessibility or whether it's just casual ableism. And I'm very guilty of that. I use a lot of, like, ableist terms. I still say dumb, you know, like, and it's a really difficult thing to unlearn, because I can understand the origin of the word and feel like, but that's no longer what it means. And the argument behind that, it's sort of like, well, you don't get to determine that. And maybe I don't, but it's one of the last, like, bastions of words that I'm like, I know this is problematic and I haven't worked hard enough at stopping myself from using them. Especially considering the way that Barrayar society works, I also would love to see how the rest of the world has reacted to their son, because Piotr is representative of the culture at large, you know, and have people been, like, hard on this kid, on the family for keeping him? Like, how has this shaken out? So, okay, let me back up, and we begin with chapter 19. So the cache of stuff that was hidden, which had been for emergency situations. There are IDs, there is money, and it says getting back out of Vorbar Sultana had always been the weak part of her plan, Cordelia felt. Perhaps because she'd never really believed they'd get this far. Travel was tightly restricted, as Vordarian sought to keep the city from collapsing under him should its frightened populace attempt to stream away. I did think it was really funny that eventually they get to a point where Drou mentions the rumor that Vordarian is dead, and the dude literally on the spot takes off. Like, just actually, I think he strips off his, like, uniform jacket or something. I'm trying to find the spot where this happened. But, yeah, here it is. Shedding his uniform in favor of a civilian overcoat and vanishing down a side street. There it is. They took the monorail system, Cordelia driving her exhausted little party on, racing the clock in her head. At midnight, they reported in at the first military installation over the next loyalist border, a supply depot. It took Drou several minutes of argument with the night duty officer to persuade him to 1. Identify them, 2, let them in, and 3, let them use the military comnet to call Tannery Base to demand transport. At that point, the DO abruptly became a lot more efficient. Oh, you don't say. This is the sort of thing where it's just like, if you just fucking did your job, then this all could have been so much more painless. So the whole vibe of Cordelia throughout all of this, like, Bothari has managed to calm himself down, and he winds up sleeping through the last leg of the journey. But Cordelia is on this sort of wild high that has come from a combination of seeing something horrific and there being trauma in that, as well as the sheer anxiety of like the uncertainty of everything that they just did, the anxiety of the like after the health of her son and what that means, and just there's almost a sort of manic quality to her, which Drou is aware of and keeps looking at her like, oh God, is she okay? Is she gonna be okay? Like there's a sense of we have to get home before she fully breaks, you know? So the IMSEC men relieved them of their personal arsenal. Cordelia didn't blame them. She wouldn't have trusted her wild-looking crew with charged weapons either. Thanks to Izar's case, the women were not ill-dressed, though there had been nothing in Bothari's size, so he'd retained his smoked and stinking black fatigues. Fortunately, the dried blood spatters didn't show much. God, I keep forgetting. Just like, yeah, he decapitated somebody. That's gonna, sure. So, Captain Vaughan appears, and he is able to tell her that what he can see of the uterine replicator is looking pretty good. Like, some stuff is a little bit high, but none of it's really worrisome. However, the treatment that he's been doing to deal with specifically the issue with the calcium is something that can't be determined by the readouts on the external. So it's just sort of like, we're going to have to service it and we're going to have to check into things and I will let you know. And when she says, do you have everything you need to cope with this? He says, Errol started setting up a lab the day after you left just in case. Is that not the best, you guys? I was so pleased by how this shook out. There's so many aspects of it. The fact that he decided he would err on the side of them being successful, first of all. That when he sees her, he doesn't look at her with a reprimand in his eyes. He's very much just so relieved that she's okay. And there isn't, like, there's no moment of, like, how could you have done that to me? Do you know what I went through? He fully leaves it alone until they are by themselves, and then is just like, please don't do anything like that again. To which she replies, very rightfully, don't make it necessary again. And he cops to that and is like, okay, that's fair. I won't. And that was like my favorite thing, is that he doesn't try and justify the fact that he attempted to keep her from doing this. He doesn't defend himself. He just admits, like, I fucked up. Yeah, I really shouldn't have handled it that way. And it just makes me so happy. Like, the two of them being so adult about things. This is all I want. So this is when Kou shows up. This is so funny. Drou's cry snapped Cordelia's eyes open. Koudelka was limping into the main portal security debriefing office. Good Lord. The man was back in uniform, shaved and sharp. Only the gray rings under his eyes were non-regulation. Kou and Drew's reunion, Cordelia was delighted to note, was not in the least military. The staff soldier was instantly plastered all over with tall and grubby blonde, exchanging muffled, unregulation greetings like darling, love, thank God, safe, sweet. The IMSEC men turned away uncomfortably from the blast of naked emotion radiating from their faces. Cordelia basked in it. I really love this. It's just such a departure from the way they've been behaving. It's so refreshing. We find out later that they get married and it's like a whole thing. And it's just so funny, guys. I don't know what it is that like it winds up causing so many of the different things that I cover to like sync up. But I was just like reading another book that I'll be covering after this for the Red Rising saga. And there is like two very main side characters that get married in that as well. And there was another thing going on in Red Rising that was like very similar to something that happened in the One Piece episode that I just recorded before this. I don't know why things like match up like that. But yeah, I couldn't help but laugh because the difference in the way that they were each handled, they're both sort of in the midst of chaos, these weddings, but the other is, there's like very little emphasis on the preparation for it, and it just is sort of happening. And this one, the preparation is a big part of what comes, and it serves as a really nice sort of distraction from everything else that's going on for a lot of people, which you would think that this sort of event, it would be a bit of a headache on top of everything. And like, there's an element of that, but it really does seem as if folks are relieved to have something joyful to focus on and plan for, you know? So Lady Vorpatral is okay. She's got like, you know, the symptoms of being stressed and exhausted from all of this. The baby is all right. And she has to say like the princess has been killed. I really regret that so much, y'all. I wish so much that she had been able to like restrain herself just a little bit longer. I don't blame her. I really don't. There are times where I feel like somebody not doing a thing that could have ended up better for everybody, I just want to be like, oh my God, why did you have to be an idiot about this? But this lady had been through so much and had just been like barely holding it together is really the impression that I got, that I couldn't be angry at her snapping at that moment and just going for his throat. I understand, you know, and there may have even been an element of like, at this point, what have I got to lose? We knew that like she had actually quite a bit to lose. If she had held on, she could have been with her son again, but it may have seemed like a pretty hopeless situation, and sometimes you just gotta go for it, you know? So I really don't resent that at all. I just wish, because I liked her, I respected her, and that is a thing later on that Cordelia really has to deal with, is the fact that, like, nobody is really giving her her due, but they all deeply admire and respect Cordelia for taking this guy's head off, and she just feels like your priorities are so fucked. And I knew that. I continue to know that, and I continue to not really fully grasp how deep that goes and how angry it makes me in certain situations. It feels a lot of the time like Cordelia is just able to sort of turn away from the way Barrayar deals with certain things. And then when it's something to do with her, there's no escaping that. And she has to really look it in the face in a way that she clearly does not prefer to do, which I don't blame her for at all. So, this is so funny. One of these guys who has been trying to get Cordelia to open this bag and show them what she has in there, he keeps just being like, Kudelka, can you just... And Kou looks in and jumps back and is like, shit. And he tells this dude, just put it down as a little present. A little present for our friend. And, so... Do they know about this yet? Cordelia held up the bag. I don't think so, milady. You've just changed everything. His grin grew feral, and his uneven stride lengthened. I expect that raid is still going to be required, Cordelia sighed. Even in collapse, Vordarian's side is still dangerous. Maybe more dangerous in their desperation. And I didn't really think of it this way, because... I sort of assumed that, like, this guy's body, his headless body turns up, and I was just like, sure, everybody's gonna just bail, right? I don't think I fully appreciated, and I don't feel like I still, like, at this point, I can't claim to fully appreciate how much the people that were involved in this coup on the, like, outside had a real deep belief in what Vordarian represented versus the obvious, like, liberality and changes that were going to be coming with a Vorkosigan regent. Like, I just sort of saw all of those folks as along for the ride and trying to grab power as they could, and their hand was forced a little early, but they were like, I was thinking of all of them as being very opportunistic, but not having ideals that were linked to this, like this coup, if that makes sense. So once I find out, like, later on, there's talk of what happens with some of the leftovers, for lack of a better way to say that, I genuinely was sort of taken aback by that and had to step back and reevaluate how I was looking at certain things, because I expected her taking his head to just be the end of it, and it's super not the end of it. So eventually they get to the conference chamber. Errol was in the center. Ilian and Count Pyotr flanked him on either side. Prime Minister Vortala was there, and Kanzian, and some other senior staffers, all in formal green dress. The two double traitors sat across with their aides. Clouds of witnesses. She wanted to be alone with Errol, be rid of the whole bloody mob of them. So he looks at her. They smile at each other. It's clear he is not going to be, like, holding this against her. Count Pyotr is just, like, as usual, the drama queen. And he slaps his hand on the table and is just like, where the fuck have you been? And she says, shopping. At first, he has a moment of like, wait, what? And then when he realizes that she's fucking with him, he gets really mad. And she just dumps the bag out. And the head rolls out onto the conference table. I'm sorry, I was reading the word traitor while I said that, and I got all tongue-tied. Because it says one of Vordarian's traitors actually fell out of his chair, recoiling. But of course, Errol breathed, every Vor lady goes to the capital to shop. I paid too much for it, Cordelia confessed. That, too, is traditional. And then she has to tell them that the princess has died. Gentlemen, if you will be pleased to excuse yourselves for a few minutes, I wish to be alone with my wife. So, she says, as they're leaving, officers, I recommend that when this conference resumes, she says this to the traitors, you surrender unconditionally upon Lord Vorkosigan's mercy. He may still have some. I certainly don't, was the unspoken cap to that. I'm tired of your stupid war. End it. Is this just the most baller moment? literally just being like, here's his head. Stop it already. Oh my God. It does not get more badass. It just doesn't. And what I love about it is that this is not Cordelia posturing. You know, this is like, if this were a moment in Dresden Files, I would be like, all right, Harry, calm down. Because Harry definitely does feel himself sometimes. And he really has an ego that's like, you know, it's outsized. And he does shit with a full understanding of the figure he cuts and the impression he is making. Cordelia, I'm not trying to say she's fully unconscious of that, but that's just not what it's about for her, you know? And that makes it so much more impressive in the moment. I wish that I could be like this, but I'm much more of a Harry Dresden drama queen ego type. I can't help it. It's just part of me. So I try and be real about that. But, so yeah, this is Piotr edged past her. She smiled bitterly at him. He grimaced uneasily back. It appears I underestimated you, he murmured. Don't you ever cross me again, and stay away from my son. A look from Vorkosigan held back her outpouring of rage, quivering on the lip of her cup. She and Piotr exchanged wary nods, like the vestigial bows of two duelists. Unfortunately, this does not last. So, Kou takes the head away, and they have their moment, and he says, don't you ever pull a stunt like that again. Don't you ever let it become necessary again. Deal. And he says, I was so afraid for you, I forgot to be afraid for your enemies. What a great line. I love it. And she's very, very much spreading the credit around. She's like, look, first of all, I had Drou, who is incredibly badass, Bothari, who is terrifying, and Koudelka, who, by the way, didn't want to be there. We sort of like made him go with us. So sorry about that. And she says, she tells him about Padma, and he is genuinely like grieved over that. And they talk about Bothari's child, and he says that they're working on getting her back. And I love that she tells him that Vordarian's last words were, you're a Baton, you can't do blank. Because she's just like, yeah, y'all aren't the only ones who can get bloody if you fucking need to get bloody, you know? Are you quite all right, love? His mouth was serious under his smile. Meaning, have I lost my grip? Yes, a little. More than a little. Her hands still shook, as they had for a day, a continuing tremor that did not pass off. It seemed necessary to bring Vordarian's head along. I hadn't actually thought about mounting it on the wall of Vorkosigan House along with your father's hunting trophies, though it's an idea. I don't think I consciously realized why I was hanging on to it till I walked into this room. If I'd staggered in here empty-handed and told all those men I'd killed Vordarian and undeclared their little war, who'd have believed me, besides you? And yeah, like once she was taking the head in the bag, I knew what she was doing, and it was like, it's absolutely a smart move, but it just in the moment felt like so barbaric a move to just like, oh, I'm going to take his head. I know that it's for proof. I know that it's a very practical reason, and this was the right move to make, but it really seemed trophy-like in the moment rather than a practical necessity. And so, you know, I had to sort of like take a moment and grasp exactly what was happening there, because I was like, what's she taking his head for? Like, it just seemed so bloodthirsty in a way that was not like her. And then I kind of took a step back and was like, oh, actually, that's a really good call. They talk about the replicator and everything. She mentions Bothari needing some help. And then she asks, like, why has he picked me to follow? What is the deal with him? Like, and this loyalty that he has to me. And her husband has a really interesting answer to this. He says, Bothari doesn't have a good sense of self. And when I met him, and he was really on the edge of cracking, there was like a possibility of almost turning into multiple personalities. I think that he actually could have made an amazing spy because he can take on the attributes that he needs to for whatever situation. And I don't think that he even realizes he's doing that. But, you know, my father wanted a loyal retainer, and that's what he was. And Barrayar wanted a monster, and that's what he was. I wanted a soldier, and that's what he was. But you aren't demanding a certain role the way that we did. You see him as a hero. And so that's what he's becoming for you. And so he clings to you because you create him a greater man than he ever dreamed of being. And that's so moving. I really, really like that explanation. And it makes a lot of sense to me. Like, it's, you know, I think a lot of us have gone through periods in our lives where we were figuring out who we were, trying on different sorts of, like, if not necessarily personalities, then interests, aesthetics, groups of friends, you know, whatever. And it can be genuinely difficult to figure out how you feel about certain things and about yourself. And I have a lot of sympathy for somebody who has not had the sort of luxury that many of us have had to learn who we are in a safe environment with supportive people. You know, this kid was raised in a brothel, being sold as a commodity by his own mother as a child. That's pretty fucking horrifying. And then, like, he escapes and he joins the military, which is that's something that makes a lot of sense. It's not only a place that you can get fed and clothed and, you know, just basically provided for in the most basic sense, but also you are given very specific parameters on how to be. And I don't, like, this is something that I always think about in regards to my father, who he was raised in a really difficult environment amongst 15 siblings, and he was abused and he just went through a lot. And the place that he found a home was like essentially a gang. He joined up with the guerrillas in Colombia, and it was a place where you were told what to do, you followed orders, and it was like all mapped out, and you didn't have to figure things out for yourself. You just had to do what you were told to do. And I think that was why fundamental Christianity really appealed to him as well. You know, he became a born again, and it was very specific rules and tenets and dogma, and it was comforting to feel like I'm being handed the rule book on how to be. So I really see this, and I love the fact that Errol knows Bothari well enough to be able to pinpoint this about his personality. I think that it's really remarkable how perceptive Errol is, and I always sort of underestimate him. I think of, because I'm in Cordelia's head, you know, most of the time. So when I'm in her head and not his, I give her more credit than I give him a lot of the time. But then he'll say things like this, and I have to remember, like, there's a reason that she fell in love with him, because he also can pull out this sort of thing out of nowhere, you know? So let's see. On the third day after Vordarian's death, the capital fell to loyal imperial troops. If not without a shot being fired, at least not nearly so bloodily as Cordelia had feared. And this is when we get information about like different groups that they had to root out. And there were some like people. One of the things that I found really funny. So first, there's a guy who gets shot by his own men because they were offered amnesty if they surrendered. And he was like, we will fight to the last man. And his soldiers were like, the fuck we will. Amnesty, please. And they just took care of him. Which, life comes at you fast sometimes, my boy. Damn. Let's see. The late Emperor Azar had not hesitated to... right. That's right. In a way, Cordelia was relieved. The traditional punishment for treason upon the part of a warlord was public exposure and death by starvation. The late Emperor Azar had not hesitated to maintain the gruesome tradition. Cordelia could only pray that Gregor's reign would see the custom end. Then, eventually, there is a guy who just crowns himself emperor. And I love that it's called a pretendership. His pretendership lasted somewhat less than 30 hours. My God, the gall. Like, and this dude is just called an extreme conservative vor. So it's not even somebody that like their name that we would recognize necessarily. I'm not going to say that they are a nobody. I don't think any vor is really a nobody, but it does seem like very optimistic. That's all I'm saying. An anti-vor group declared an independent republic in the chaos. The new count, an infantry colonel from a collateral family line who had never anticipated such honors falling upon him, took instant and effective exception to this violent swing to the over-progressive. Vorkosigan left it to him and his district militia, reserving imperial troops for non-district internal matters. You can't go halfway and stop, Pyotr muttered forebodingly at this delicacy. One step at a time. I can walk around the world. Watch me. That is a really, really good line, too. Just, guys, whomst among us does not need the occasional reminder that anything that is progress, like, that we need to respect that more than we do. It's difficult, especially as somebody who just wants what I want right away, all the time, forever. But inching forward is still forward movement. God, it's hard to keep that in mind, though. So Gregor, they have to tell him that his mother's gone. I feel so bad for this kid. And then they have to basically parade him around so that everybody can see that he's actually still alive. And even though it seems sort of heartless to tell him this awful news and then put him on show for everyone, Cordelia is like, I'm real glad that they told him beforehand, because if he were made to be seen by everybody and I'm with him, and if he were to just keep asking me, when am I going to get to see my mom? Excuse me. It would have been too heartbreaking, and I don't know how I would have been able to handle it. So, and that makes total sense to me. Just, I feel so bad. And he asks her if they're going to try and kill him too. But there's no sense of fear to it. It's just a sort of like now what, And they wind up actually taking custody of him, which is a separate thing from the regency, evidently. So, yeah, here's the moment. A sort of Barrayar and Vor reacted to her with a frozen, deep formality, and she thinks that they think she's nuts. And then eventually she realizes it's respect, and she's really pissed about it. And I couldn't help but laugh because I was like, yeah, of course it's respect. You literally just walked in with the man's head in a bag. You are a legend. Like, are you serious? Of course this is how they're reacting. I would react this way, and I'm not even a Barrayaran. I'm sorry, Cordelia. I totally get how, like, unjust this feels to you. I'm not even, like, really trying to argue that. But this is what happens when there is the distance of a story being told versus being in the room with the bloody head rolling around on the top of the conference table. You went through a trauma, and that's not what they see. They see only the glory of what you managed to pull off and how incredibly badass it was. And it's the sort of thing that I can't help but admit I would fall for myself. Like, I'm not too proud to admit that hearing the story of something, I would probably have this same reaction, even though I could stop and think about it fully and admit, oh yeah, that sounds horrifying, actually. I would never want to go through that poor woman, you know? But even in the midst of all that, I can't help but take a step back and be like, yeah, but that was fucking baller, though, you know? And that's sort of what a lot of, like, this season of House of the Dragon has been about as well, is how so many people who have not actually experienced war firsthand are very eager to shed blood for the sake of a story, for the sake of what it's going to sound like in a history book versus what the experience and the horror of it actually is, and what it would do to not only themselves but the people around them. And it's sort of like just comes with the territory with this sort of stuff, you know? So she says, are you going to use this new status of mine? And Errol says respectfully, I will use anything. I will use you. I will use myself. I will use whoever it takes to make sure that Gregor is on the throne in 15 years and hasn't gone crackers and hasn't become a monster like his father. I will do whatever it takes. And like I said, I really do respect that he admits that to her. I can't even fault him. He has a mission, and he is, you know, committed to that in a way that, like, if you step back and look at what it is, what his responsibility is, that this leader be decent and good for an entire planet. Yeah, that's pretty important. Yeah, that is something that I can't help but feel strongly about also. I can't help but understand why he would be so cutthroat, I guess, about it. It makes sense. So, good on you, actually. So yeah, there's this amazing moment here. Prime Minister Vortala took time to lecture her and make it clear her new duties for caring for Gregor involved no political powers. She did have economic functions, including trusteeship of certain Vorbara holdings that were separate from imperial properties, appending strictly to Gregor's title as Count Vorbara, and by Errol's delegation, she was given oversight of the Emperor's household and education. But Errol, Vortala emphasized I was to have no power. Vortala is not all-wise. Let's just say he has a little trouble recognizing, as such, some forms of power, which are not synonymous with force. Your window of opportunity is narrow, though. At age 12, Gregor will enter a pre-academy preparatory school. I love it so much that she's just like, I'm the one teaching and influencing him and shaping his viewpoints. Like, they don't see how, and Fort Kosakin's just like, they don't, and they won't. We know. Do your thing. Honestly, that's like simultaneously so funny and so sad at the same time that they like don't fully appreciate the significance of that. I don't even know what to say about that. Like, very short-sighted. My God. So one of Cordelia, we're starting chapter 20 now. One of Cordelia's first orders was to assign Drusnakovi back to Gregor's person for his emotional continuity. This did not mean giving up the girl's company. It eased Cordelia's heart when Drou and Kou were wed a month after Winterfair. And then we get a lot of like the talk of the preparations for the wedding. I did think it was very funny that Alice Vorpatral, who is the one who gave birth to this son, she is so consumed with her son that it's clear she needs something else to do, because it's sort of feeding into a fussiness on behalf of the child as well. Like the kid is fussing more because his mother fusses, is the sort of idea here. And she sees what Drou picked out for a dress and is just horrified. And she's like, no, this is way too much lace. You're going to look like a bear. Like, it basically looks like fur. And apparently, since Drou is very tall, that's also part of it. And she says, long falls of silk is what you need. Which later on, when Cordelia sees Drou in the dress, Cordelia's like, whoo, she was right. Oh my God, she looks amazing. Which I am very satisfied to hear. You guys know the aesthetic. I mean, primary for me. And let's see, a week in advance, Kou and Drou are considering eloping out of sheer panic, having lost all control of everything whatsoever to their eager helpers. The day and hour came at last. A large circle made of colored groats was laid out on the floor of the Red Room, encompassed by a star with a variable number of points, one for each parent or principal witness to stand at. And it's interesting, like, they don't need a person to marry them. They recite on their own. There's a coach that stands to the side and basically feeds them lines like a prompt at a play. But it's a lot less, it's not like less ceremonial than I had imagined, because there's still so much ceremony to it. But it's just a lot less familiar than I was expecting it to be. Because a lot of the culture with Barrayar is familiar to me. It's outdated, you know, it feels like old to the point of ancient, but I recognize it. And this was just very different. So let's see. Sergeant Drusnakovi was a shorter, slighter man than Cordelia had expected. And there is a wonderful moment where one of her brothers is trying to, like, give her advice on something, and her father cuts in and is like, the fuck do you know about it? And I was just delighted. Oh my God, I forgot too, that we find out Drou and Kou's first names. His is Clement and hers is Ludmilla. My brothers used to call me Lud. Rhymes with mud. Also thud, blood, crud, dud, and cud. Yeah, that's a fucking terrible name. I'm so sorry. If there's any Ludmillas listening, condolences. I will not take it back. You know I'm right. And this book is correct also. After the first formal glass of the good wine Piotr sent on, Cordelia drifted up to Kou and murmured a few words about Baton research on the detrimental effects of ethanol on sexual function, after which he switched to water. And when Errol says that she's cruel, she's like, not to Drou. And I was like, good looking out. Appreciate you. Oh my God. Cordelia gets Bothari, and she asks him how things are going. I love that he says that his daughter is starting to, like, creep around. He says, I put her down and look away, and I look back and she's moved. And this is what I hear happens with babies when they start to learn to crawl. It's just like all of a sudden they're like lightning. And I had this with the kitten as well. Like, once she started to gain her health back, it was she's so tiny, but she would fly like a rocket down the hallway, and I would be like, where'd she go? And I'd see her at the other end of the house. And there's just a sort of like, how are you hanging in? And he says that he isn't really as foggy as he used to be, that there's a new medication that seems better. And overall, the impression of him is just that he seems very relaxed, and there isn't the edge of somebody who is about to crack to him the way there used to be. So Gregor tries to sneak in and get some treats. And Cordelia stands up for him because Ilian says to, like, one of his minders, how'd he get away? And Cordelia says, he's not away. This is his home. He ought to at least be able to walk around inside, or why do you keep all those useless guards on the walls? Gregor says, Drou, can't I come to your party? Drou looked at Ilian, who looked disapproving. Cordelia broke the deadlock without hesitation. Yes, you can. So under Cordelia's supervision, the emperor danced with the bride, ate 3 cream cakes, and was carried away to bed satisfied. 15 minutes was all he'd wanted, poor kid. That was just so heartbreaking. Like, that was it. He just needed some treats and a little bit of fun time with people that he likes, and then he was ready to go to fucking bed, because he's a kid. I'm so glad that, like, he's being allowed to. His mother would let him, I really think, you know. She wasn't somebody who treated him like he was made of glass or just an object. She really treated him like a child. So then we go to the birth of the child, and I'm putting birth in quotes because he's in the replicator and it's such a strange situation. And Cordelia's thinking when she sees him first, good color. Unfortunately, that was all. That was really good. The contrast with baby Ivan was overwhelming. Despite the extra weeks of gestation, 10 months to Ivan's 9.5, Miles was barely half Ivan's size at birth and far more wizened and wrinkled. His spine was noticeably deformed, and his legs were drawn up and locked in a tight bend. He was definitely a male, though, no question about that. And we find out that there is something that has fused his hips in such a way that this was part of, like, the calcium treatment, and they will have to do surgery for that, that there is a way to surgically correct the lower spine, and that, you know, they'll have to separate those. They can't do both of them at once. And the surgeon just, like, touches his arm, and there's a snapping sound, and the baby starts crying. And the surgeon realizes, oh my God, like, I just broke his humerus. Oh my God, his bones are super brittle. At least he has bones, sighed Vagan. He almost didn't at one point. Be careful, said the surgeon, especially of the head and spine. If the rest are as bad as the long bones, we're going to have to come up with some kind of reinforcement. At this point, Piotr throws a fucking tantrum. And at one point he says something to Cordelia like, you won't make a fool of me. And she says that would be redundant. And then he turns to fucking Errol and he says, and you spineless skirt smothered, if your elder brother had lived. Errol's face drained to a gray hue Cordelia had seen but twice before. Both times he'd been a breath and a chance away from committing murder. Piotr had joked about Errol's famous rages. Only now did Cordelia realize Pyotr, though he may have witnessed his son in irritation, had never seen the real thing. Pyotr seemed to realize it too. His brows lowered, he stared, off balance. And Errol keeps control of himself. If my brother had lived, he would have been perfect. You thought so, I thought so, and Barrayar thought so too. So ever after, you've had to make do with the leftovers. We make do. But my firstborn will live. I will not fail him. And instead of just letting that hit, which it does, he softens it by saying, I will not fail him again. A second chance you were never given. Errol is so compassionate. I need to be more like this, guys. I am so vicious when I'm angry. I really am. And I am not willing to concede anything. Because I'm just no, fuck you though. And these little moments of Errol still trying to extend a hand to his father throughout it all. It's admirable. It's almost impossible. It just feels like, how do you keep doing this? And then finally, Pyotr looks at Bothari and is like, and you fucking helped her get this kid. Who are you even loyal to, me or my son? And Bothari says her, which wasn't even an option that Pyotr offered. And Pyotr is just like, fine, yeah, go to her then. And she's like, okay, I guess I have a new servant. I guess you can be the bodyguard to my child. And he seems really happy with this. He's delighted. So let's see. They return to the lab to listen attentively to the rest of the doctor's lectures on Miles' special needs and vulnerabilities, arrange the first round of treatment schedules, and wrap him warmly for the trip home. He was so small, a scrap of flesh lighter than a cat. This whole thing, children might or might not be a blessing, but to create them and then fail them was surely damnation. What a line. So the chapter ends with them getting home, and then we have the epilogue, which jumps ahead 5 years, and Cordelia is yelling at Dr. Vaughan, you never told me the bugger was going to be hyperactive. And the way that this, it turns out that he and Elena are friends, she's mentioned here. And the way that Vorkosigan frames it is he's had 5 years of being pent up, and probably now that he is able to move, it's just all letting loose at once. In a way, it's reassuring that all the frustration didn't turn in on itself and become despair. For a time, I was afraid it might. And they talk about that and the change in his attitude for a second there that made them a little bit worried. But why do I feel like he has us outnumbered and surrounded? So it turns out they're at Pyotr's place. He was civil last night at dinner. I was civil, Cordelia shrugged. He as much as accused me of starving your son into dwarfism. Can I help it if the kid would rather play with his food than eat it? I just don't know about stepping up the growth hormone. I did think the dialogue with the peas marching to surround the bread roll and demand surrender was rather ingenious. You could almost picture them as little soldiers in imperial greens. This is delightful. So it turns out Miles has stolen one of Pyotr's horses, and like a good horse, he has an eye for it, which clearly impresses Pyotr, because when he asks him, why'd you pick that one? He says, it's got more of a bouncy gait than the others. And Pyotr's like, yeah, this was going to be a dressage horse. How about that? And he says I'll teach you if your mother agrees. And it's like him trying to challenge Cordelia because he knows she hates horses and he thinks she's just going to say absolutely fucking not. But I love this. If she could not keep him safe, perhaps the next best thing was to teach him competence at living dangerously. He was almost undrownable already. Yes, if the sergeant accompanies you. Bothari shot her a look of horrified reproach. Errol rubbed his chin, his eyes alight. Pyotr looked utterly taken aback to having his bluff called. And the like vibe of Miles is just somebody who is like going to get his way, and she considers how maybe he would be a good negotiator to use with, like, you know, treaties and stuff eventually, because he just seems to have a real knack for it. And I really enjoy the fact that, like, Cordelia's telling him you have to get your arms set before you can start learning to ride. And Pyotr can't resist pushing it a little bit more and be like, actually, dressage training, you're supposed to be, like, not using your arms or hands at all, just keeping your seat. So you can start right away. And she's just like, fine. I must say the months Miles spent immobilized in that dreadful spinal brace did teach him how to do charm, the most efficient long-term way to control those about you and thus exert your will. I'm glad he didn't decide to perfect whining as a strategy. He's the most willful little monster I've ever encountered, but he makes you not notice. When my father was home on leave one time from the Baton Astronomical Survey, we made model gliders together. 2 things were required to get them to fly. First, we had to give them a running start. Then we had to let them go. Learning just when to let go was the hardest part. And it ends with Errol saying, I believe he'll soar high, dear Captain. And that's the end of the book. That was a lovely ending. I really liked it. I was sort of wondering if we were going to do what we did in the last book, which was jump to new people that we've never seen before. I don't mind that we didn't do that. I did like it in the previous book, but I sort of appreciate that she doesn't follow a specific formula in the way that, say, George R.R. Martin does, where it's always doing that in the prologues and epilogues. But yeah, that was really satisfying. So I'm looking forward to the next one. I don't remember what it's even called. I haven't checked. But I will be, I think, starting that one this Thursday, if I'm not mistaken. Let me look at the schedule here. What is today? The 2nd. Oh, no, it won't be until next week. The Warrior's Apprentice. What a different name. That sounds so much more like high fantasy. All right, cool. All right. Thank you guys again so much for coming and hanging out with me. Thank you to Jeff for commissioning this episode. I hope you guys are enjoying the coverage. And until next time, toodaloo, motherfuckers.
That was an Unspoiled Network podcast.